Ah, the Darlington throwback weekend. It's that one time a year where NASCAR throws it back to their good old days. So for the 2019 Southern 500, the theme is throwing it back to the early 1990s. Specifically 1990 to 1994. But anyway, with this video, we're going to look at the handful of throwback schemes that are being put on display this week. I'll give you the story behind them, and I'll give you my honest thoughts about it. So, let's jump right into it. So the first throwback scheme we have here is the 00 of Landon Castle. His throwback scheme is a tribute to Sterling Marlin's Coors Light scheme in the early 2000s that he ran for a good chunk of his career. You know, I've always liked that scheme a lot, especially when I watched NASCAR as a kid. Disappointed when we saw the 40 car in that scheme go. You know, it's great to see it back, you know. Too bad it's not a 40 car, but oh well. You know, really like the scheme. Really good choice for this one. Not gonna lie. So the next scheme we have here, of course, is the 2 Miller scheme of Brad Keselowski. His throwback scheme is once again a throwback to Rusty Wallace. But this is not just any throwback Rusty Wallace scheme. This was the scheme Rusty Wallace raced in 1996. So yeah, it's sort of like the 2017 throwback Brad Keselowski did, but only difference is those stripes underneath. You know, I've always liked the black Miller Lite cars. I especially like that 2017 Rusty Wallace paint scheme. That was my favorite paint scheme in NASCAR all time. But this one tops the bar. Because I never thought that throwback scheme would get topped. But of course, records are made to be broken. So yeah, obviously, I really love this paint scheme a lot. I honestly wish they'd run the black Miller Lite car more often, but we can't have nice things like that. Let's move on. Next throwback scheme we have here is the number 3 of Austin Dillon. His 3 car once again is throwing it back to another Richard Childress paint scheme. Man, it seems like every year with Austin Dillon, they always throw it back to either Richard Childress or Dale Sr. Man, oh man. But yeah, not a bad scheme. Not gonna lie. I think, but you know, some of his other schemes are a lot better though, but hey, it is what it is, I guess. So next paint scheme we have here is the 6 of Ryan Newman. His throwback scheme is the scheme Mark Martin ran when he won the 1993 Southern 500 for Roush Fenway Racing, back when it was Roush Racing. So yeah, really good color and paint scheme, fits Oscar Mayer sponsorship well. So yeah, I'll give this paint scheme a lot of points. It's a really good scheme. Next throwback scheme is the number 8 of Daniel Hemrick. His throwback scheme goes to the original Caterpillar logo and the original Caterpillar colors of red and silver. Not a bad looking paint scheme. Sorta is remnants of that Sterling Marlin scheme, but hey, you know, it's still a really good scheme. So yeah, I really like this one a lot. So the next paint scheme we have here is the number 9 of Chase Elliott. This throwback paint scheme, once again, Chase throws it back to his dad, Bill Elliott. The paint scheme Bill ran in 1981 when Bill drove for Chase's grandpa, George Elliott. So yeah, keeping the paint throwback schemes in the family, I guess. You know, I think this is just going to become a yearly theme with Chase Elliott. You know, like it's always going to be a throwback to Bill Elliott, his dad. Like, that's always been the theme every year. But yeah, you know, really nice paint scheme. Really like it. Next paint scheme we have here is the 10 of Eric Almirola. His paint scheme is, he's throwing it back to Tony Stewart's 2002 championship paint scheme. Get used to this kind of throwback, because this is the theme this year for Stewart-Haas, is throwing it back to Stewart's 3 championship paint schemes. Since Tony Stewart is part of the 2020 NASCAR Hall of Fame induction ceremony. So yeah, throwing it back to him, I guess. You know, it's a really cool paint scheme. You know, really love it. You know, really great to see that scheme back on track. But yeah. So the next paint scheme we have here is the 11 of Denny Hamlin. His paint scheme is throwing it back to good old DW, Darrell Waltrip. And his paint scheme he ran in the late 90s and 2000, the twilight of Darrell Waltrip's career. So yeah, really like the paint scheme, really iconic. So yeah, an iconic paint scheme back on track, not bad. Not bad at all. So the next throwback scheme we have here is the 12 of Ryan Blaney. His paint scheme, he's throwing it back to Michael Waltrip's early 1990s Penske scheme when Michael Waltrip drove the 30 car. You know, really good paint scheme. You know, I preferred some of Ryan Blaney's other paint schemes in the past, but, you know, not a bad scheme. So yeah, I'll take it. Really nice scheme. So next throwback scheme we have here is the 14 of Clint Bowyer. His throwback scheme, he's throwing it back to Tony Stewart's 2011 championship paint scheme. You know, I've always liked this paint scheme, you know, watching it a lot as a kid. You know, watching, of course, throughout 2011 when Tony Stewart and Carl Edwards are both part of the greatest championship battle in NASCAR history. It is the greatest, hands down, the only title fight to ever end in a tie. So yeah, it sort of feels like it's 2011 when I see this scheme. Feels like it's 8 years ago and I'm watching Homestead, watching Tony Stewart race Carl Edwards for the championship all over again. Really bringing back some memories. Damn. So the next paint scheme we have here on the list, we have the 18 of Kyle Busch. His paint scheme is a throwback to the Snickers scheme that Bobby Hillin used to drive in 1990. So it fits that timeline there, you know. Not a bad scheme, you know. I think Kyle Busch, he's had some better throwback schemes in the past. But most of the 18 throwbacks we've seen have mainly been the Interstate Batteries one. There was last year where it was a Skittles throwback. I wonder what next year... I wonder if next year's going to be an M&M's throwback scheme. You know, we're going to have to wait and see. That's 2020. That's next year. But, you know, I guess Kyle Busch is going to alternate what sponsor he'll have as a throwback scheme. Because remember, 2017, it was Interstate Batteries. Last year, it was Skittles. This year, it was Snickers. Will it be M&M's next year or a different sponsor? Could it even be Pedigree? We're just going to have to wait and see. So the next paint scheme we have here is the 19 of Martin Truex Jr. His throwback scheme is throwing it back to Truex's Xfinity scheme that Truex ran with DEI in the mid-2000s, from like 2004, 2005, the years that Truex won the championship in Xfinity. So yeah, throwing it back to himself, you know, not bad. It's not a bad paint scheme. You know, it's great to see at least Truex compete in Throwback Weekend again. Because I think the only time Truex really competed in Throwback Weekend was 2017. Hasn't really competed in it much. But yeah, not a bad paint scheme. Really like it. But let's continue on. So the next paint scheme we have here is the 20 of Eric Jones. His paint scheme, Eric Jones is throwing it back to a late model car. Eric Jones raced in his early days of racing when he was just a teenager. Back in the great hills of Iron, Michigan and around the state of Michigan. Growing up as a kid. But yeah, you know, throwing it back to himself. Really like the scheme. Really like the story behind it. Sadly, though, this type of thing already happened last year when Denny Hamlin threw it back to a late model car he ran last year. So yeah, sort of Hamlin already beat you to it, but hey, Eric Jones, it's still a great story, and it's still a great paint scheme. You know, really like it. Easily probably one on the list for my favorite paint schemes this year. So the next paint scheme we have here is the 21 of Paul Menard. His paint scheme, Paul is throwing it back to a Ford Sunliner paint scheme that Wood Brothers' late founder Glenn Wood ran in 1957. Going way back with this one. See, it seems every year it's going to be a certain Wood Brothers throwback. It's either going to be a Cale Yarborough throwback or a Wood Brothers throwback. But every week they run the Motorcraft scheme alone. It's a throwback in itself. But yeah, you know, this one going way, way, way back. Way back. So yeah, not a bad scheme. Really like it. Of course, the 21 Motorcraft Ford being one of the most iconic schemes in NASCAR. So throwing it way back like this makes it even more iconic. So the next paint scheme we have here, oh boy. We have Joey Logano in the 22. Joey Logano's throwback scheme is throwing it back to Kevin Harvick's Shell Pennzoil scheme that Harvick ran from 2007 to 2010 with Richard Childress in honor of Richard Childress Racing's 50th anniversary as a team. But I put this certain photo up because notice on this photo that Joey Logano's wife, Brittany, I think her name is Brittany, correct me if I'm wrong, she's wearing a fire suit. Anybody remember Pocono 2010 after the Logano-Harvick incident when Logano said that Kevin's wife, Delana, wears the fire suit in the family? 9 years later. Oh, the fucking irony. Now Logano's wife wears the fire suit in the family. Oh, the irony. This, we don't even need to do the rest of this video for me to say this is now easily my favorite paint throwback scheme. Because of that photo here. The fucking irony in it. But you know what? I promised you throwback reactions. We're gonna continue with it. So, let's move away from this photo and move on to the other throwback scheme. So the next throwback scheme we have here is the 24 of William Byron. He's throwing it back to the famous Cole Trickle Days of Thunder paint scheme. If anyone's wondering, Cole Trickle was Tom Cruise's character name in that movie. You know, Days of Thunder, of course it was released in the 90s. Easily, hands down, the greatest stock car NASCAR movie ever made. Everyone's gonna say Talladega Nights. Some may even say Herbie Fully Loaded. Me, I'm gonna say Days of Thunder. Honestly, the video game that came out afterwards, the reason why we have NASCAR video games to begin with. But yeah, really iconic paint scheme to one of the great NASCAR movies ever created. Throwing it to Tom Cruise, Cole Trickle, whatever you want to refer to him as. But yeah, really like that paint scheme. Really cool. So the next throwback scheme we have here is the 32 of Corey LaJoie. His throwback scheme is honoring Dale Jarrett's 1991 Xfinity paint scheme. So yeah, not a bad scheme, but you know, we've seen better schemes here. So yeah, really good paint scheme, throwing it back to a NASCAR legend in his early days. So yeah, I'll give this scheme a solid grade. Not bad. So the next throwback scheme we have here, we have the 34 of Michael McDowell. His throwback scheme honors Jimmy Means paint scheme that he ran in the late 80s and early 90s. Not a bad scheme, pure blue car. So yeah, not a bad scheme. So yeah, really throwing it back there. You know, right around that timeline that the main theme of this year's Saturn 500 is. So yeah, not a bad scheme. Let's continue on. So next scheme we have here is the 36 of Matt Tiff. His throwback scheme honors late model racer David Hittker. You know, somebody that Matt Tiff watched a lot and idolized. Of course, David Hittker is a famous Michigan racing sports legend in the late model series. So yeah, on the dirt tracks, of course. So yeah, not a bad scheme, even though Matt Tiff has shown questionable talent in that car. He still has a nice throwback scheme. I'll give him kudos on that one. So next paint scheme we have here, we have the 38 of David Reagan. His throwback scheme honors the white and blue iconic paint scheme ran by David Pearson. And of course, the sponsor is Shriners Hospital, and David Pearson used to be a Shriner himself. So yeah, not a bad paint scheme, you know, really iconic paint scheme, of course, and throwing it back to a very great NASCAR legend, one of the greats of the sport, of course. So yeah, we like this scheme. They're really giving David Reagan some good throwbacks, as this is the last year of Reagan's career. Hopefully with drivers leaving in their last year, they can try throwing it back to schemes like this. Let's keep that trend going. So the next paint scheme we have here, we have the 41 of Daniel Suarez. His paint scheme, he's throwing it back to Tony Stewart's 2005 championship win scheme. I really like this scheme, but the one problem I have with it is, why is the sponsor Haas? Like, that Haas logo on an orange car, it just doesn't look right. It just doesn't fit that car. Like, honestly, why isn't the sponsor Eris? Like, Eris would fit that scheme a lot more. Like, I like the scheme, don't get me wrong, but I just don't like the sponsor they have for it. I would have preferred Eris over Haas. You know, we'll call that a questionable call by Stewart Haas Racing and Suarez. Like, you know, I would have preferred Eris over there. Just that Haas doesn't fit that orange well. It just doesn't look right. So the next paint scheme we have here, we have the 43 of Bubba Wallace. His throwback scheme, Bubba's throwing it back to the race-winning scheme that the late Adam Petty drove in ARCA in 1998 at Charlotte. Of course, Adam Petty taken away too soon from us back in 2000. May he rest in peace. You know, not a real bad paint scheme, of course. Of course, they even have the same sponsor for it being Victory Junction Game Camp. Since Richard Petty has like a gazillion goddamn sponsors for that 43 car, since they, of course, have sponsorship issues. You know, hopefully they can get a full-time sponsor and do some different kind of throwbacks. But hey, this is a bit of a way off from the normal throwbacks. You know, a bit of a curveball, because every time we see a 43 throwback, it's usually to a famous Richard Petty paint scheme. But this year we get a bit of a curveball, a bit of a turn here. Now to Adam Petty. Now I'm wondering in the future if they're going to do a Kyle Petty throwback soon. We're just going to have to wait and see on that one. So the next paint scheme we have here is the 47 of Ryan Preece. His throwback scheme, he's throwing it back to Ron Bouchard's famous paint scheme he drove in from 1981 to 1987. Really like that throwback scheme. It sort of looks like the normal Kroger's car, though, in general. But hey, you know, a few minor differences. But hey, not a bad scheme. But let's continue on. So the next paint scheme we have here, I like this one a lot more than this driver's throwback scheme last year. We have the 48 of Jimmy Johnson. For Jimmy's throwback scheme, he's throwing it back to a super stock champ truck paint scheme he ran in 1995. And Jimmy will have the matching fire suit for that same timeline too. You know, I really like this paint scheme, really like it a lot. I like it a lot more than the throwback Jimmy Johnson ran at Darlington last year, you know. That one last year was way too recent. This one's a lot more later. Just misses that 1990-1994 cutoff, though. But still, nice paint scheme, nice story behind it. You know, I really like it, and no biasness since I'm a Jimmy Johnson fan. But yeah, really like this scheme, but yeah, let's continue on. So the next paint scheme we have here, of course, is the 51 of BJ McLeod. It is BJ McLeod. I checked the entry list. Because as you saw in the card, there's no name on it, of course. Because whoever drives the 51, it changes every week. But yeah, this week for Darlington, it's BJ McLeod. His throwback scheme, he's throwing it back. It's a Stroker Ace throwback. And it resembles the famous Chicken Pit car. So yeah, of course, Stroker Ace, a famous auto racing TV show. So yeah, not a bad scheme, throwing it to a late TV show. Not bad. Not bad at all. So the next paint scheme we have here, we have the 88 of Alex Bowman. His throwback scheme, he's throwing it back to Tim Richmond's paint scheme that Tim ran throughout much of the 80s. With Henrik Motorsports, of course. You know, not a bad paint scheme at all. Really like it. You know, throwing it back to Henrik's earlier days. Before Henrik really took off in the 90s and became a top team. So yeah, really like this scheme. Not bad. And of course, the final throwback paint scheme we're going to go over is the 95 of Matt DiBenedetto's scheme. His scheme, he's throwing it back to Toyota's IMSA GTO championship winning car in Toyota's early days. And in this scheme, they also have the classic red, orange, and yellow stripes here. Of course, those stripes are synonymous with Toyota's performance in American motorsports. Of course, Toyota being one of the top sponsors in NASCAR, winning multiple cup titles in 2015 and 2017 with Kyle Busch and Martin Truex, respectively. You know, and it's a white car. So yeah, not bad. Not a bad paint scheme. At least the Benedetto's leaving with Vine Family Racing with some good paint schemes. But yeah. So anyway, that is all the throwback paint schemes for the 2019 Bojangles Saturn 500 this Sunday. So yeah, some really good paint schemes. Of course, like I said, the Wagano paint scheme is one of my favorites. Mainly because the photo where Joey's like Brittany, is wearing the fire suit. And of course, we all remember what Wagano said in Pocono 2010. That one day. And then the irony 9 years later. But yeah. I know Kurt Busch announced he was throwing a throwback, but at the time of the recording, the scheme wasn't revealed yet. And, if I waited too long for it, I wouldn't have a chance to really record it, and it wouldn't be as good. But yeah, that's the 2019 Saturn 500. Hope you enjoy these schemes, because come Sunday, that's as good as they're gonna look. But yeah. And of course, next year, Darlington, of course, will be in the chase next year, actually to open the chase. And yes, for the chase, they are still doing the throwback. So we will get to see some throwback schemes for the chase. So we get to see the chasers do throwback schemes. That's going to be really interesting. But yeah, that's all I got to say for this video. Hope everyone has a great day. Of course, if you enjoyed it, smash the like button. Brand new to the channel, please subscribe for more of this content, and make sure to tap that bell to get all notifications. But yeah, I've been C-Rad from C-RadTV. Hope everyone has a great day, and yeah, peace out.